right. Well, welcome to the UvA TLC webinar, How to Encourage Self-Regulation of Students. This webinar is recorded, so I think it's good to know. And then I would like to start with introducing ourselves. We are Sandra, Cornelissen, and Ilja, Boor. And we're working at the Faculty of Science as in different roles as teachers, educational consultants, and educational innovators. And I think we would like to start with sharing what we're about to do in this webinar. Can you show? Yeah, great. So first we'll start with to update or tell you a little bit about what our definition of self-regulation is, what we understand, because there are so many different concepts around self-regulation. Then we will share some of the experiences that we had so far, and then we want to end up with some tips and tricks about what you can do, especially of course in the next academic year when we will probably mostly online, sorry. About what we can do. So self-regulation, let's start with this. Yeah. So what we want to share an explanation, which is in a small video, which is about 2 minutes, which we explain the concept. It's something that we made like 2 years ago, and it explains all the different phases of the cycle. So.
How can you bring out the best in yourself? In short, by learning how to learn. It's crucial to consciously think about your own thinking and learning process. It sounds simple, but it's not easy to consistently do this in a structured manner. How can you achieve this? By going through the phases of the self-regulated learning cycle: planning, performance, and reflection. Applying these phases is a skill which can be demonstrated with a simple example. Let's look at Sarah, who wants to learn how to run a marathon. Planning. Ask yourself, what do I need to achieve my goal? Performance. Use strategies and monitor your performances. Reflection. Ask questions like, what went well and why? If I continue, will I reach my goal? If not, what will it take to do so? Subsequently, use results from previous performances to guide you through the next cycle. By repeatedly going through the cycle, you can reach your goals. Self-regulated learning can be applied to many other goals than just Sarah's. It's up to you to persistently do this and bring out the best in yourself, not just now, but for the rest of your life. The most important step to do this is learning how to learn.
So this cycle will be the center of our webinar. We will also discuss many of these phases in the subject and the topics we're about to discuss right now.
And what's good to mention maybe is that we made this explanation or short video, as you could see, we made it for students. So we also really use it in our education. So we use it to show them also what we expect of them. So that's why also we'd like to share it with you.
Yeah.
Oh, and another thing is we keep an eye on the chat. So if you'd like to mention anything or to say something or add something to the discussion, please mention it in the chat. We will keep an eye on this, and either you can speak or write something in the chat if you want to share something, and we will mention it to the rest.
Yeah. Can you move on to the next? Yeah. I think we're going to start with what we experienced the last few months, and we will do so based on the questions that are mentioned here. And the first question we're going to address is, what is your experience, or have you heard from teachers about self-regulation skills of students in online education? And please, this is our experience and what we heard from many teachers, mostly at the Faculty of Science. So please join us if you have other experiences, or if you want to mention something, if you have questions, then you can use the chat. So Sandra, would you like to start with sharing something?
Yeah, sure. So what we saw the last period is, of course, we had to really quickly put all our education online. So that had some consequences about what students had to do, what they did, what they viewed, and how they could do it. And one of the things that I really saw is that we usually we work at the I teach at a Bachelor of Psychobiology, and usually we already record our big lectures. So we had all the recordings available from last year. So what happened in a really quick way is that we made all those records available for the students of this year, so that they could watch them. But what we saw is that for students it was quite difficult. At the beginning they were really enthusiastic and they were happy that we gave so many, but that we reacted so quickly and that they could just go on studying. So for a while it went really well, but then in the end we saw that it's quite difficult for students to keep this up. If they just have a lot of online lectures going on and they have some moments available, of course, that they could talk to the teacher or to each other, but most of it was optional. And we really saw that it decreased, that students came less and less, and they found it quite difficult also if you talk to students individual to keep up with what they're asked for and to keep the structure in their lives of studying, of coming to college, of working together. So that's one of the things that we really mentioned, that we really saw happening over the past months.
Yeah. That they tend to delay or wait a little longer or postpone all their, especially when they were not obliged to be digitally be there at a certain time. I think the other thing that I heard of many teachers is they said that some of the students were starting to get insecure. Basically, it was more about their performance, because usually they chat to each other in work groups or they see each other and they somehow are able to compare what they did or their work to that of other students, but they didn't see the work of other students, or not that easy. So some of them even said that even though they were way above the expected standard, they were still afraid to hand in a specific work because they were insecure about their own work. So this is also something that I heard of.
Oh yeah, and I see in the chat now there's one comment from Annema, thanks. Learning how to learn is much more abstract goal than running a marathon. Yes, for sure it is. So we really agree with that. And we can share a little bit about why we chose to give such a concrete example, and that's exactly that. To make it, for students like give an easy and simple example to show them what these phases are. And of course, we don't show this explanation like just as a single view and watch it, and that's learning how to learn. But we try to give them also some instructions and some they write about how they would do it in their own life. So how they can translate this marathon, which is really concrete and.
Hadden we 28 andere mensen.
Mariska, wait. Can you put? Wait, I will.
Yeah, she's muted. Yeah.
She's muted now. Okay, good. So that's why we chose such a concrete example, and to let students themselves think about how do we do this in studying, and what do you do if it's much less concrete than this marathon, but to show them the cycle. And we have another question, Ilja. You wanna first mention what you were?
Yeah, well, we come to that later. The other thing that we noticed, that since it was so abrupt for both students and teachers, no one was prepared, and that this also caused that students were not in a regular study rhythm. So they were used to study together or in a library, and they were now in a noisy house with noisy roommates or with bad internet or all kinds of issues that make it really, really hard for them to study. So I think this is also something that I think makes it difficult for them to self-regulate. I think it's more challenging now.
Yeah, Yeah, and one of the comments from Anthony it says like, how are students applying this cycle if it's also combined with group work? That's of course interesting question, and it's also what you have to take into account. There's if you make this cycle, there's a simple one where you make just this individual cycle and you have all the influence yourself, but of course you're dependent on other students and on the teachers and what you get for like information. So the thing that we'd like students to do is to also take this into account. So what are the insecurities that you have and how can you solve them, and how can you talk with other students to make sure that we all follow this same cycle if we work in a group.
And how can you monitor? I think in a group you can also monitor where you are toward the extent toward the goal. I think maybe in a group it might be more difficult, but I think maybe you need to hand in some tools for students to monitor, but I think they can even in a group.
Yeah, and it helps you reflect even. If you're with a group and you ask those questions, it's easier to ask those in a group and to talk about it than to just individually go through them. Then it can be more difficult.
Yeah.
And Sharon asks, do you think goal setting software could be beneficial? That might be a good idea. We're going to talk about goal setting a little bit more. But at least it's really important to set these goals. That all the students know that those goals are the ones they are. So yeah, that might be beneficial for sure. Yeah, but as long as there's clarity in the goals. Yeah, and that's one other thing that we noticed, and probably more of you have noticed, that because this was a really abrupt change of going online, that students also didn't know, and we teachers also didn't know yet what to expect from the testing. So also that was a big insecurity, and that made it also difficult for students, I think. And still, of course, yeah. And that made it also more difficult to focus on what do we have to do. Is the traditional way that we always did our education is the way that we learned? Can we still do it now, or do we have to prepare for something else, for another test, or do we have to practice different things?
Yeah, for example, in the Bachelor of Psychobiology, there was an oral exam. I think one of our teachers that were involved in there are also in this meeting now. And they noticed that because they never had an oral exam before. So they were quite scared. I think it was, I think it was because we didn't have the opportunity to train them or from the beginning, and of course not tell them from the start on that we're going to do this. So I think it was more difficult than all the other exams or assessments that they had before.
Right, really different, and maybe it also asks for a different preparation. So that's also what we would like to take with. That's why we're having this discussion, and maybe you have something to share too. So share it in the chat. So this is really why we'd like to address some of the problems so we can use it to make our education for next semester take this into account and make sure that we do the best that we can to, from the beginning, set the goals and share our experience to students, and make sure that they know what to do.
Yeah. So then I think we also discussed what changed in the past period. So, and if so, what was the change? I think what it changed was, what I heard at least is that mostly related to motivation. So first, everyone was really excited, and after a while, it was really more difficult, especially when students were not obliged to be there, so it was their choice. So, for example, I talked to one teacher at the Faculty of Science, and he mentioned that there was this deadline 2 weeks ahead, and there were 2 work groups that students were able to attend to ask questions, but there were like a few students there. And then the weekend before the deadline, his inbox exploded basically. So there were so many questions. So they tend not to join the times that they were able to ask questions, but they had just questions just before the deadline. And it is something that he didn't experience the course before that. So it changed over time.
Yeah. I see one more chat comment. From Jan. Do you think that learning to learn should be discussed at the beginning of every course? Wouldn't it be rather repetitive and thus distractive? And shouldn't this be addressed somewhere else in the actual course?
Good question.
Yeah.
I think it's something that learning how to learn is something that takes time. So it's not something you can spend some time on in day one, week one, course one. But I think it depends on the course, because we did it in academic skills, which are work groups during the whole first and the whole second semester, so basically the whole year. So I think you can divide it up and spend some time on it on a regular basis for students to reflect on their learning. And but I think it depends on the course if it fits in. And I think the nice thing about the psychobiology is to start with introduction to psychobiology, and then students are really interested in how what happens in the brain and how learning works. So I think for us it's easy to start this in this course. Yeah, I think it's
So we do take it as also what brain mechanisms play a role there, but also like how can you use it for yourself to study in a beneficial way. So what we know about learning how to learn, you can also see it from a scientific perspective.
Exactly. So we can do both. So they can experience themselves, and they can also get the theory behind this.
Yeah.
And then I think we have this question: what does and does not work online? So I heard one of our teachers from the psychobiology team. She talked. In her experience was, and I really liked what she mentioned, is that she said some of the students in my work group are quite shy. Even though they're with 16, they're still quite shy. And for them, that the workroom was now in Zoom and there were chats, that it was easier for her to chat, to say something out loud in the group. So for them, even Zoom was more safe and was a good start. And if she invited her to say a little bit more, then she was able to do that. So I think it depends of course, it depends on the students, but this is also something that did work, and it also really worked really nice that they have in Zoom you have these breakout groups, so you have small groups of students, and it's also more safer sometimes for them to discuss specific topics.
Yeah, so and I think one thing that worked on the short term was putting all the lectures online. But I think it would be more beneficial, of course, to have smaller bits of information and to have a guideline on how to reflect on those and how to learn those and how to take from those what you want, because you also don't have if you give a really big lecture to 200 people in Zoom, or if you watch a video, then it's much more difficult to ask questions and to have a discussion. So it's also one thing. Yeah.
And Sharon also mentioned that it's easier for students if they can ask a private question to a teacher.
So Sharon says, can you also invite students to send a private question as you as a teacher? Yeah, for sure, you can do that. So you can ask also, you can make it a more interactive lecture. So that would be an option. And another option would, so you're asking, are you thinking of cutting up your web lectures? That would be another option, to make like more small web clips or use videos that already exist to explain basic mechanisms. So that might be an option too. It depends on the course and on your goals. So that's where we come back again at what are your learning goals and what fits those. But we'll come also back to one of the courses that we are redesigning right now, and of our thoughts doing this.
And I would like to also add to the question of Sharon about inviting students to send a private question, is the other way around. It can be beneficial as a teacher to give some private feedback to your students in the chat.
Yeah, especially if you have a moderator. So if you have a big group, then it's really advisable to, if you're the one lecturing, it's really nice to have a moderator next to you that keeps an eye on the chat and that can react to that. So
but the example was basically about presentations.
Yeah.
If a student is presenting something or asking a question about someone who's presenting, then you can say something about this question or give some feedback about this question, for example.
Yeah, and it would also be a good way from Jessica to pre-record a lecture and integrate with Canvas quizzes. So have multiple mini lectures. So that could also be an option. Yeah, mini lectures or web clips or for sure. Explanations. Any other things you'd like to share about how did the last period work out for your students or for you as a teacher? Otherwise, we go on. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so let's share something about the best practice now. Students love breakout rooms. Yes, Gabby, agree. So that's one of our big tips also. Like it's really nice to use the breakout rooms because they can talk in smaller groups and work really together. And it's I just had a meeting this afternoon with some of our teachers' academical skills, and one of them mentions there's a fear of pushing the unmute button with students. So they're really scared. Actually, to push that unmute button is much bigger step than if you're in a work group together to start talking. So there's something there, and it has a name in our students. It's like the unmute button fear or something like that in Dutch. And they talk about it, and they also give it back to us. So it's much more difficult for them to contribute to a conversation when you're in a Zoom session than if you're really seeing each other and you're in a room together. Yeah. So that's also why a breakout room would be a really good option for sure. Yeah. So we'd like to share one practice that's it's the very first year course of the psychobiology curriculum, and it will start, of course, in September next year. And we are thinking right now, we're in the middle of the process of reinventing this course, of thinking about how can we give as much as we can, doing largely online education. How can we still give the students also some tools for self-evaluation, for working together, for having the whole experience as much as we can. So that's what we're in the middle of now, and we'd like to share some of that with you. And please also contribute again to the chat if you'd like to share something or add something.
And Sandra, maybe you can move on to the next slide. Sandra.
It doesn't work?
Oh, yeah.
Don't you see it? Can you see the right one now, Ilja?
I can, yeah.
Okay, good.
Hold on. So Sandra is course coordinator in this course, and I would like to ask her some questions on this course. So before we start, can you maybe say something about how this course looks at the moment?
Yeah, so what the course usually consists of, it's an introduction of the whole psychobiology field. So students are having mostly lectures in a big group, in a big lecture hall. These are also recorded about many psychobiology subjects. And next to that, they have a few practicals. So there's 3 times that they really come to the site to follow a practical. And one of them is with like the 3D brains. But there's also a practical day at the AUMC, where they really see the real human brains, and they see some of the structures, and they have some conversations there. And there's 2 exams. So there's 1 exam, 1 part exam after 4 weeks, and there's 1 end after the 8 weeks of the course. So that's more or less how the course is built up. There are 4 lectures a week, and then every 2 weeks there's a practical or work group situation where students are coming together in smaller groups studying the brain, actually. Yeah.
It's like lectures, groups, and all kind of practicals. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what are your plans? What are you thinking about for next year?
Yeah. So one thing we think about, and that's also one of the things that we learned, is that students need a lot of structure. So one thing that we're thinking about now with the teachers also that give many of the lectures is to make a kind of modules, to have 1 week or maybe 1.5 week modules of subjects that are really close together, and to have a really nice structure within those modules, so that they start with a certain event. So people come together, for example, in Zoom, or there's an explanation online, and then it's clear what they have to do at what time during those 1.5 week modules, and there's a wrap-up of those modules. That will be a wrap-up with the teacher, but it will also be a wrap-up in kind of an either formative or summative test. Mm-hmm. So that after each module, they really have one part of the course done, so that they don't have to wait for 4 weeks, even to have an exam and to get some feedback on how they're doing actually.
Yeah. So you used to have like 2 exams, like
Yes,
one
exactly.
halfway and then at the end, and now you're making modules, and that you're going to have assessments at the end of each of the models.
Exactly. So we'll have 6 modules in 8 weeks going on. That's the plan now. And each module we will give some, well, structure that students can grab and that they can also feel like, okay, this part I did. And then of course, we will sum up also in the testing. So we won't only test one module 1 week and then forget everything about it. We will build up a little bit during the course.
Yeah, nice.
Thanks.
Then the other question I would like to ask you is, this is about the goal setting. Eh? So how do you make it clear to students what the goals are? What are your plans?
Yeah, so I think it's actually, you always have to do this, of course, but it's even more important online. So there's a few ways that we do it. Of course, we have the intended learning outcomes for the course, but we also, usually we also have for a practical or at the beginning of a lecture, we also mention like, okay, the goals of this lecture are, or from this activity, you have to take this and this and this home. These are the goals that you're gonna reach for this day or for this few hours. But what we also like to add is what are the goals for this module, so we can kind of take the intended learning outcomes and maybe tell something more about them for each module, like what do we expect of the student and how can we test that in an appropriate way and how can students prepare for that.
Yeah. And do you plan to change something on Canvas or to communicate
Yeah, so I think in few ways there's some changes necessary. So it will be in Canvas also. Usually we just have the whole 4 weeks of lectures showing in one row, and students know, of course, from the schedule, like when can they watch it live, and they also can watch it in the recording if they like. So they can do it also at the moment that they choose. But I think now it's also important to give more instructions to also in Canvas of the structure of how do you structure those modules, what is expected for you for each time. So I think we also should have this structure in the Canvas page, and also on the it would be good for students to see in their schedule also when they need to study themselves, for example, or when there's time to collaborate with each other, so that we give some designated times for, okay, here you can collaborate on this assignment, and you can do it together with those and those people on this and this platform. So I think you need to give a little bit more structure in that way than you usually do.
Yeah, and do you consider then to connect some of the assignments that they collaborate on with lectures?
Sorry, I was reading the chat. Can you mention again? Yeah.
Multitasking, yeah.
That's 2 times too many things, yeah.
Okay, I'll ask again. Do you plan on connecting specific lectures with specific assignments, and collaborations, so they are more or less forced to do?
Yeah, so I think especially when you give them a lot of material, like either big lectures or lectures cut up in small pieces, that it's really good to have assignments in which they see what they have to do when, and also to have moments that they come together and use this knowledge or use what they did, so that for sure there's some way that they can connect it to each other.
Yeah, nice. There's something, Jessica is really enthusiastic and thankful even for Canvas.
Wow.
And the planner, the calendar, for planning.
Yeah, so calendar helps, and in our faculty we use data notes. It also helps a lot. We can also mention all the study moments for students and when they work together, when they have work groups, when they have.
Yeah. And even add intended learning outcomes to specific activities. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, then how do you ensure the monitoring phase? So how do you ensure that students can monitor where they stand in relation to the goal to be achieved?
Yeah, so I think also usually we do that, of course. So we need to have some formative testing and some feedback within the course that students know, okay, this is where I stand for the test. But it's a bit of, it's I think, more difficult when you do it, when you test everything online and when you have multiple kinds of testing. So what we usually did is we gave them a lot of multiple choice materials just to practice, like what do you know, and they also get feedback on that. But now we're going to test also in other ways. So we have to find some alternative ways of testing by making assignments, by telling them each other a little bit of what they learned or explaining to each other the materials. So we also have to be a bit more innovative with that. So I think that it's also nice for each module within each, of course, because we test more during the course, they also get more feedback, so they know where they stand and they can prepare better for the next one. But also there needs to be some formative testing. For example, on Canvas, you can use it very well.
Yeah, so you're going to do two things. You're going to do like more assessments because you're going to do the assessments on each of the module, and then you're also going to include more formative assessments and more moments of feedback.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that students reflect and adjust if necessary? So the last phase.
Yeah. So I think there's two things that I'd like to mention here. Mm-hmm. One is that it's always good to have a little bit of information, to give students information. So to talk to them about learning how to learn, using this explanation, using some tools, some assignments related to it. And what we plan to add is usually there's a lecture about this learning how to learn, and there's an assignment in the academical basic skills course with their tutor, where they reflect a little bit on this. But I'd like to make this also a little bit more I would like to make students a little bit more aware of this, especially because it's more difficult when you're online, you speak less to each other, so it's nice to give them some multiple moments of opportunities of reflecting on this. That can be with their tutor, one-on-one, it can be in their tutor groups, but it can also be, I think, in a big lecture if you make nice breakout rooms and let them talk about this. So creating awareness, I think, is one of the important things, and creating opportunities to reflect for them. And another one that I would like to mention is Ilja and I made a tool, the Visible Learning Trajectories tool from the Faculty of Science. Most people will have heard of it, and we will pilot next year also for psychobiology to make it possible to connect the testing results to the learning outcomes. So they will really have the test results from their exams connected to what of the learning goals of this course is this part of, and how did you do it, and where will you need it next. So will there be a course later on in the curriculum where you will need this, which you didn't get yet, and what can you do to get this knowledge anyway, or to make this learning goal anyway. And that they will also discuss during mentoring or tutoring conversations.
So this is not something for this course.
Yeah, so it's more over the whole curriculum. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then the last question is, how do you facilitate student self-regulation?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned many of those parts already, but I think mainly by talking to them, by letting them talk to each other, and by giving them a lot of opportunities. So making sure that they know how they can connect to each other, when they're meant to connect to each other, and what platform they can use. So that's one thing that we really learned from the last period, that they really need some structure also in that. Yeah, that it's more difficult to say to them, okay, and go and find your way. It was also easier. It was easier when they were all walking on Science Park, seeing each other. And
I'm quite surprised about this, because I thought because they're watching on their phone whole day, so why not able to connect with each other? So how come we need to do that?
Yeah.
So, but somehow it's more difficult for them. And I think especially when a new year, because now at least they more or less know each other, especially in the first year, the end of the first year. But now when we start with new students, I think it's going to be even more difficult. So that we really, really need to structure and help them out there, and give them the opportunity, even make the opportunity to facilitate for them to be able to meet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see no chats, no additional questions. Anyone would like to add something to the discussion or share their own experiences?
Yeah, Anthony.
I'd like to add something. It's one of the questions I sent in already into the chat, is the capability of students to deregulate. And that's possible because they have access to numerous applications and channels and other channels than we normally communicate through, like through data nodes or through messages from Canvas. And they live in their own information bubble with certain expectancies, difficult to reach and difficult to correct. And that's the problem in itself. You can't forbid them to use these channels. You only can emphasize that we use specific channels to reach out for them. And it's sometimes really difficult. I'm in the computer science department, and they are flooded with kind of Telegram, WhatsApp, call them. And I think it's really a problem because they also behave in a sort of short, real-time, last-moment management system, waiting for the next WhatsApp to take steps, and they all wait for these other.
Yeah. And do you have any solution to that, or do you have any suggestion how you could solve that, or any way to?
Especially now we're doing everything online, you almost show the same behavior. For them, it's more or less the same environment. So you more or less join them instead of they join the situation that's standard for us.
Mm-hmm. And do you also hear from students that that's what they experience, or that's what they?
No, they experience not explicitly, implicitly. After a couple of days, they explained that they missed information and said, yes, it's on Canvas. Oh, I looked in whatever kind of other information source. And I was like, yeah, but. So I think the solution is, but for each lecture, you should emphasize, this is the communications channel. If you like it or not, this is the one.
And this is what we use to reach out to you.
Yes, and reactions should be going through that channel, not through whatever. So sometimes they send some message, then the TAs tell me that they received something through Telegram. Yeah, but I'm not on Telegram.
And do you notice that more now that's online, or that's always what you notice, or what you?
I already noticed that, especially a computer science student, because they think they understand, they comprehend what is going on. Mm-hmm. But now it's more forced by the situation, sitting at home, and they just happily play around all those communication tools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And did you notice
sometimes it happened that one of the teachers, TAs, more or less spoil the time to be in WhatsApp, Telegram, and all the other tools to get their feedback from students. But I don't think it's the proper way.
No. So is there something that you're going to change now? That you're going to be more clear to them about how you're going to communicate with them?
Oh, yes. I'm quite clear about that one. But if you're a little bit too late, it's already within a couple of days, it's more or less fixed. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't explain that right away, it's more or less accepting as it is going on at that moment. So any moment you've been earlier than that moment is better.
Yeah. So this is a nice tip for the start of next year for each course.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, and also make sure, that's also what Jessica agrees with, but also indeed make sure that you only use those channels that are meant for it, and that you don't go into any other suggestions or options or Facebook or whatever. If they communicate to each other like that, that's fine, of course, but I think it's also, especially in these online times, nice to give them some at least some suggestions of what they can use and what we ask them.
Yes, but still, I think you should stick to one or two channels and not be polite, and also stick time in going to WhatsApp.
Agree. Yeah.
Makes a big mess.
Yeah, agree.
Especially
I think it depends on the number of students, because in our case we have like 250 that start each year. There's no way I'm going to make WhatsApp group or what.
We even have one email address for the whole first year cohort. They can only email to that address. They cannot email any teacher specifically, because it's just too much if they're going to ask all their questions to the teachers. To the lecturers.
Do you have a forum within Canvas for them?
No, we have just
That isn't used because they have got their own forum. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Then we have a mailing list that they can reach out to all TAs and whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes used, but normally not. Mm-hmm. And then we have a Zoom channel to have feedback rounds. It works. Yes.
Yeah. So agree. Yeah. It's good to have those. Yeah.
It's Jessica. I would also add that one thing that I think it's interesting because switching from offline to online teaching, it was often hard to get my students to actually go to the Canvas page sometimes and download these things, and they'd be shocked that that's where it was, even though that's where it always was. But now, because we're fully digital, it's like I'm able to get them. It's a strange benefit maybe, or at least an opportunity for upskilling for all of us, in that what I'm doing is I'm building in more things that require them to log in. So formative mini quizzes, formative assessments and checks and things like that they have to do as completion for the course, ungraded but required for completion. And then they know they have to go in there, and in doing so, it makes sure that they've clicked through the slides. It makes sure that they've checked on the assignments. It's sort of an opportunity there. And I also do the same thing with email, that you cannot email me directly, that there is a course discussion board for any content. Personal things are different, but basic content questions are in a course discussion board, and I encourage the students to answer each other's and to vote for their favorite ones for me to talk about in the lecture, and using like the thumbs up option. And I think these things, it's making them have to go through this space more and more often, which they still do the other things as well on the side, but at least I'm getting more that they're going through this flow, which I think has been helpful.
Yeah, agree. Yeah. Yeah, so it also has some benefits, at least. Yeah, especially you cannot tell them everything anymore in small rooms. So it's they have to go online, and they have to go to the designated channels to even go to their online lecture. So yeah, that these are things that also help. Yeah. All right. Thanks for your contributions.
Yeah.
Let's
wrap up. Huh?
Yeah, let's wrap up. Yeah. So we summarized our experiences into some tips and tricks of online enhancement of self-regulations, and you saw many examples. You mentioned also many examples, but we try to structure it in some way to show you what we think is important to take into account. And the two most important messages we have is to provide structure and to provide support. So those are the two main things we'd like to stress out. And within providing structures, we mentioned already a lot of examples, but the main thing is always to make clear to students what the goals are, and to facilitate collaboration between students, and provide them with the information that they need, of course. So give them really the structure, make sure that they know what the goals are, and schedule activities. And those usually, of course, we only schedule the activities that they have to go to, but I think, or we notice that they really need a little bit of more help in scheduling those activities. So you might also consider to schedule online activities which you do together, or give them tools or platforms, or show them how they can do this.
Or when they can study themselves.
Yes, exactly. When they study themselves, when they have to do what we expect of them.
Especially when they start, I think it's
especially for first year students. The other ones, second, third year, know maybe a little bit more of how they do it. Especially they had already an online few blocks. So this accounts for online as well as offline, but also for live activities as well as activities that they can do anytime they like. So also like a Canvas discussion page can be something that you use for this. So these are the most important structure things that we could think of. Yeah. And then the second main instruction is to provide support, or the main,
So that can be like to start a conversation with students. Of course, it's quite obvious to do that, but I think that also related to the question of Jan, that he said, like, how do you really talk with them about learning how to learn? I think it's maybe a little bit too much to say, let's talk about learning how to learn, but you can also ask them, how are you doing? How's learning going? So how is studying? Do you have questions? What's working for you? What's not? How come? This kind of small talk, and I think it's easier for them to start talking about this. I know you can also provide suggestions to them, but because I think sometimes students think something works for them, but literature shows that it hardly works for anyone. So you can also maybe suggest things that work or don't work, and of course we can relate it to theory of the brain about learning. And I think you can also ask them if they can have suggestions for each other. So make them talk to each other. I think it's also easier for them if they talk to each other than the teacher's talking to them. The other thing is, I think we provide sufficient feedback moments during the course, and of course, especially during the course, so they can do something about it, use this feedback to make a change or to improve, or so they have the opportunity to use the feedback and offer sufficient contact moments with the teacher. So I think, like Sandra mentioned in her course, she wants to have a kick-off of the module and also a wrap-up. And these are contact moments that they have with the teacher of the lecture at specific times. So that I think it's not enough is if a lecturer would say, like, yeah, if you have any questions, please send me a mail. So make sure that you have these contact moments in the course, and then for several things, for work groups, for practicals, but also for lectures.
Yeah, and with a really, and where you mentioned what this moment is meant for. So usually what we also noticed the last period is that if you just give students an hour where they can ask questions, so you say, okay, I'm online every week or every day and you can ask any question, it's quite difficult for students to come and to think of a question. So it's good to also give a goal to those meetings, like what do you expect them to do before? What do you expect them to come with? Then you give them some information. Yeah,
I think what usually happens then is that a few come to see if there were any questions that they are interested in too. So I think it's better to guide them a little in these kind of things, what you expect for them. And I think you can also use this moment, especially when they start next year, for each other to meet for more social context, like the things that you usually have just before a lecture starts, that they just chat with each other and there's like a little buzz going around. You can do this buzz online as well.
Yeah, and like Consuela mentions in the chat, it can be really good to schedule extra sessions or an extra session with tutors or with each other to discuss also how Corona affects their learning. So make it really, break it open. Let them talk about it to each other or to teachers, to anyone, but make them reflect on it. That's really, I think, also about starting a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other one, I think this is the last one. Try to keep the responsibility of students responsible to their responsibility in education on campus. But basically, we still want to add that because the experiences is harder for them to self-regulate online. So keep that into account. So if you want to make that self-regulation, if you want to compare that to online and online, make sure that you don't make it harder for them now. So this is, I think, the last thing that we would like to add.
And there's something just for fun shared, so take a look at it. I would say I didn't take a look at it yet, and I also agree with Jessica. It really helps telling students what you expect of them. So she says their students were surprised when she told her study goes on throughout the course, in addition to the lectures. Yes, indeed. So it can really help to just even telling them already surprises them. So if you don't tell them, they have no clue. So it really helps to tell them these kind of things that maybe we think they all should know. Yeah. It really helps.
Definitely part of the goal setting. What you expect from them, at which level you expect something from them, and when. Yeah.
One last thing I would add is I think the points of socialization, I think for every faculty member, it's different based on the class you do, your own vision as a teacher, and the level that you want to bring this in. I mean, every teacher also has their own value system on what they do and how they do this. And it's also based on the size of the class and a variety of other boundary conditions. But one thing we've heard some teachers telling us at the TLC has been using some interesting gaps. So for example, if you would normally say to your students, okay, if in the offline world, you would say work together for 20 minutes in a group, and then you can go for your 10-minute coffee break and then come back and we'll discuss. What you can do is actually leave them in the breakout rooms for 30 minutes and say work for about 20 minutes. And then, we'll come back a little bit after that and actually just give them a little bit of space to do what they, and go and then get a cup of coffee, guys, and come back, but give them a little bit of space in these smaller spaces just for the other stuff too that happens in the hallway. And we also heard a really good idea from someone where they said what they're doing is setting up something for the teacher office hour where you can sign up and everybody gets to the office hour at the same time, and they put all the students in a breakout room and then they can all chat with each other if they want. And then one at a time, the teacher meets with the students, kind of like when they would line up outside of my office in the long hallway. So sometimes there's these little things, I think, that aren't that much harder for us to facilitate and don't require more bandwidth or effort on our part as a teacher that might help. And then I've also heard of other teachers who last week, as a celebration for their last week of the class, the students wanted to do online Pictionary together. And they played online Pictionary just for outside of the class, just to hang out with each other.
Exactly.
And then they did a streaming music together and invited the professors along. So, but I think it depends on your philosophy as a teacher and what you want to do on that. But just knowing that there's also going to be other resources. I think in the fall too, I think this is like one of the first times that we're really going to be relying on our student associations, probably in ways we haven't before, and thinking more and actually recognizing there's a lot of resources from the study advisor and student associations to also help bring our students together in ways that they really are going to need right now. And so I'll be interested to see how those collaborations work, but I know that the faculties are really talking heavily with the student associations to also ensure that experience is there for our students.
To make some kind of buddy systems, and I also really like your tips, Jessica. Thanks for sharing.
And it's good to have, like, also for a teacher to have some ways that you can facilitate students working together, or just a small talk, or having more the individual conversations that we also talked about it with our teachers, that usually in a work group you're with 16 students, but you talk also to everyone separately a little bit, during some assignment, they ask you some question about something else, and that's really much more difficult online. So then exactly the breakout rooms would be a really good idea. And we also talked about having 2 teachers in one work group, so that one can separately talk to a few students and the other one can give some more general information. So you can really think about those kind of practical ways to work this out. Yeah, and indeed, like Consuela said, leave the meeting open for students to, well, even you can let students come in earlier, or you can leave the meeting open if that's possible for your Zoom account, that they can chat to each other for a little bit, or they can have some time. Yeah.
Unless you have another meeting yourself, which
exactly, which we just noticed. Then the whole Zoom account goes off. The meeting goes off. So I think we can wrap up with this, Ilja. Do you want to add anything?
No, just to keep on sharing. You would like to add?
Yes. So that's our last. Our last message to you. Yeah, there's also a discussion board on the Keep on Teaching Canvas page. I would really love to invite you also to keep on sharing, because it's also always really nice to hear experiences from other teachers and how they take a look at things, or how their experiences is. So please keep on sharing, and you can use the Keep on Teaching Canvas page. And of course, indeed, like Jessica says, keep coming back to the Keep on Teaching. There's a lot of webinars coming with different subjects. And, time to discuss and to share. Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time and your contribution. And hope to see you again on the Keep on Teaching side.
And have a really nice afternoon and evening.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.